Nisimgħu ħafna startups u kumpaniji li jgħidu kemm hu diffiċli l-aċċess għal finanzjament. Hemm ħafna investituri hemm barra li forsi ma jemnux fil-prodotti tagħhom, ma jemnux fis-servizzi tagħhom u għaldaqstant mhuwiex faċli li jakkwistaw investiment. U din hija sitwazzjoni li teżisti f'Malta, reali f'Malta daqskemm hija reali fl-Unjoni Ewropea. Merħba illum waqt the Malta-EU Business Gateway the MBB podcast se nifukaw fuq l-aħħar inizjattiva tal-Unjoni Ewropea, is-Savings and Investments Union, u din tibni fuq il-qafas tal-Capital Markets Union, forsi fokus aktar ċar fuq kif is-savings u t-tfaddil tal-familji jistgħu jiġu indirizzati lejn investimenti produttivi f'negozji żgħar, f'infrastruttura, fassi sostenibbli. L-għan huwa wkoll li l-investituri iż-żgħar ikollhom aċċess għas-swieq, pariri finanzjarji aħjar, forsi aktar trasparenti u fl-istess ħin li l-fondi tal-pensjoni u tal-assigurazzjoni jinvestu b'mod aktar fit-tul. Ibqgħu magħna kif se nitlu aktar fil-fond ta' dan kollu u se nitkellmu wkoll dwar x'opportunitajiet jeżistu għal min jixtieq jinvesti b'mod etiku. The MBB Podcast. The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa miġjub lilkom minn ReAPS Asset Management, sussidjarja ta' APS Bank, the Energy and Water Agency, l-Aġenzija l-Enerġija u l-Ilma, kif ukoll bl-għajnuna ta' Finance Malta. U kif għattilkom fl-introduzzjoni miegħi fl-ewwel parti ta' dan il-podcast David Lanzon. David Lanzon inaqgħad ma' ReAPS Asset Management fl-2017 bħala Portfolio Manager ta' Discretionary Client Portfolios kif ukoll bħala Co-Manager ta' l-APS CCAV. Qabel inaqgħad ma' ReAPS okkupa rwoli fil-rwoli ta' ġestjoni tal-investimenti ma' HSBC Global Asset Management u mal-Bank Ċentrali ta' Malta u wkoll ko-awtur ta' żewġ riċerki xjentifiċi ippubblikati. David, l-għonet, grazzi ħafna tal-li inaqat magħna dan il-podcast. Xtaqtek tispjegali min hija, min huma ReAPS Asset Management?
Mela, ReAPS Asset Management hija kumpanija li timmanagġja assi finanzjarji għannom tal-klijenti tagħha. Hija kumpanija illi shareholder tagħha u APS Bank, ġifieri aħna kumpanija sussidjarja ta' APS Bank fully owned minn APS. U aħna liċenzjati bħala UCITS Management Company. Sadina l-liċenzja tippermettilna illi nimmaneġġjaw is-suite ta' APS Fund CCAV, ġifieri APS Fund CCAV taħta hija kappa illi taħta hemm 5 fondi li għandhom għanijiet differenti u aħna nimmaneġġjaw daw il-fondi. Daw il-fondi l-aktar li jkunu intiżi huma l-investituri ninsejħulhom retail investors.
Il-mistoqsija tiegħi hawnhekk kienet se tkun x'inhu l-profil tal-klijent tipiku tagħkom?
Mela, aħna nikkejterjaw essenzjalment minn investitur żgħir, ġifieri aħna l-possibilità li tinvesti ġo prodott li nimmaneġġjaw aħna tibda prattikament minn €50 fix-xahar taħt il-kappa ta' APS funds, ġifieri investiment kan waqt investiment ġew wieħed mill-APS funds. Imma mbagħad noffru pereżempju wkoll servizz ta' discretionary portfolio management. Discretionary portfolio management huwa anti sal-klijenti illi jixtiequ ikollhom xi ħaġa aktar tailor-made. U hawnhekk ovvjament l-ammont ta' investiment ġeneralment ikun jibda minn portafolli id-daqs tagħhom ikun minn €500,000 il-fuq. Ġifieri nitkellmu jew high net worth individuals, jew ikunu institutions, kumpaniji li għandhom ammont ta' flus li jixtiequ li jiġi maniġjat. Bħala ReAPS Asset Management nagħmlu xi affarijiet oħra wkoll fost l-oħrajn. Aħna named investment manager tal-prodott tal-pensjonijiet, ġifieri prodott tal-pensjonijiet ta' APS, kemm għall-personal u kemm għall-occupational pension plans ta' APS. Daw ma il-bread and butter tagħna, il-main things li nagħmlu bħala ReAPS Asset Management. Bħala team, aħna team ta' bħalissa qegħdin 10 minn nies. Kulħadd għandu l-area of expertise tiegħu, ovvjament għandna nies li qegħdin jimmaneġġjaw il-portfolios bħali, Mbagħad għandna nies li jaħdmu f'risk, nies li jaħdmu f'compliance, eċetera, eċetera, eċetera.
Mela, fuq ir-rwol tiegħek nixtieq inkellmek, fuq dak li inti tispeċjalizza fih, portfolio management fil-kuntest Malti, x'inhu l-approċċ tagħkom?
Mela, ara, aħna naħseb illi biex ikollna diskussjoni fuq l-approċċ tagħna l-aktar portafol relevanti hawnhekk huwa l-APS Income Fund. L-APS Income Fund huwa fund li aħna konna nedejna, kien l-ewwel fund li nedejna way back fit-2008. U dan il-fund għandu lan li investi primarjament fassi elenkati għaw Malta. Ġifieri dan il-fond huwa dak li huwa klassifikat bħala prescribed fund. Dan il-meta fund ikun klassifikat prescribed ifisser illi at any point in time irid ikollu 85% mill-assets tiegħu, 85% jew aktar mill-assets tiegħu investiti għaw Malta. In exchange for that, il-fund ikollu a preferential tax treatment. Ġifieri għall-investitur aħħari dak il-fond it's a tax efficient way to access the local market. Issa, kif napproċċjaw l-investiment fil-fund? Mela, l-assi finanzjarji elenkati għaw Malta huma primarjament tlieta. Ġifieri għandek l-stocks tal-gvern illi aħna nużawhom l-ewwel nett biex niġġeneraw income fil-fund milli max li naqalha minn fuqhom. Huma sors ta' likwidità tajba fil-fund għalfejn għax inti għandek market maker fis-suq, ġifieri daw tista' il-faċilità li tbiħħom u tixxihom mingħajr ma timpatta l-prezz hija relattivament faċli. U nużawhom ukoll anke biex nimmaneġew dak li jsejħulu interest rate risk. Ġifieri inti meta qed tixxi bonds, speċifikament jew partikolarment government bonds, inti tista' tagħmel anke leħ kapitali minnhom mhux just leħ mill-limax. Ġifieri il-portfolio manager ikollu veduta li limax fis-suq ħajonqos iktar ma tixxi government bonds li jkunu ġeneralment twal jimmaturaw fit-tul. Dak ikunu aktar sensittivi għal tnaqqis fl-imax u hemmhekk ikun hemm lok li tistamel capital gain. No parti minn xogħolna. Dik hija parti l-ewwel asset class li investi fiha l-fund. Mbagħad għandu l-fund isu on average ikollu nofs l-assi tiegħu investiti ġo bonds maħruġin minn kumpaniji diversi. Issa kif taf inti għaw Malta il-corporate bonds m'għandhomx credit rating. Allura hemmhekk id-due diligence li tissir biex naraw, biex nifhmu eżatt l-ammont ta' riskju li qegħdin nieħdu, biex nifhmu eżatt jekk aħniex qed niġu kompensati għal dak ir-riskju ikun ġeneralment dettaljat, ġifieri rridu niltaqgħu mal-kumpaniji, nanalizzaw dak li qegħdin jippubblikaw, prospectuses, financial statements, etc. Però corporate bonds huma sors tajba kif tiġġenera dak ngħidulu extra income, fis-sens li inti jekk qed tixxi corporate bond, l-istennija hija li l-max li ħaddaħħal ħajkun aktar wara milli qed tixxi stocks tal-gvern, għalfejn qed tieħu aktar riskju. Mbagħad bħala isa sleeve biex il-portafoll il-fond ikollu opportunità ta' tkabbir, nallokaw isu bej 20 u 25% f'isma ta' kumpaniji elenkati. Primarjament kumpaniji elenkati fil-Borza ta' Malta, kumpaniji aħna x-xogħol li nagħmlu nippruvaw naraw illi ikun combination ta' żewġ affarijiet. One illi jtuna dividend payments li jkunu sostenibbli, ġifieri aħna minn dak l-investiment li qed nagħmlu qed indaħlu l-income forma ta' dividend, imma wkoll li jkunu opportunità ta' tkabbir hekk kif ix-share price jitla'. Ovvjament ix-xogħol tagħna huwa hawnhekk jinvolvi li nidentifikaw dawk il-kumpaniji l-aktar li jkunu jgħidu aħna underappreciated mis-suq, ġifieri hemm opportunità
u li jkollhom ċans li
l-prezz tagħhom mhux qed jirrifletti dak li aħna nsejħulu fair value. U nippruvaw npożizzjonaw il-portfolio biex nagħmlu jew intejbu jew nakkwistaw rata ta' ritorn.
Mistoqsija marbuta ma' ħadin li xtaqna millek, kif tibbilanċjaw bejn exposures lokali u internazzjonali fl-istrateġiji mod sħiħ tagħkom kemm dak li għandu x'jaqsam ma' bonds u equities?
Mela, jekk qed nitkellmu fuq l-income fund x'aħna tlaqna minnu kif għedna il-fond li għandu mandat li investijaw Malta, aħna nħarsu lejn tliet affarijiet. Mela għandek il-likwidità, id-diversifikazzjoni tal-assi u l-kwalità l-kwalità tal-assi. Ma nibdew mill-likwidità. Mela, huwa fatt magħruf illi ċertu areas tas-suq Malti mhumiex daqshekk likwidi. Ġifieri semmejta aktar kwiri kif l-istoks tal-gvern huma likwidi għax għandek il-market maker, corporate bonds u equities ikun hemm drabi fejn ma jkunx daqshekk likwidi. Issa aħna tinsiex illi l-fond jipprezza kuljum, ma l-investituri jistgħu jitlu joħorġu kuljum fil-fond. Issa l-fund manager jara li għandu biżejjed, actually l-fund manager flimkien ma' risk manager jaraw illi hemm biżejjed likwidità fil-fond biex nistgħu nmitjaw id-demands ta' cash inflows jew cash outflows. Allura nużaw dik il-15% sleeve li għandna bħala liquidity sleeve għalfejn għax meta nagħmlu investimenti barra minn Malta ġeneralment ikunu highly liquid investments illi daw tista' tbieħhom jew tixxihom faċilment. Għandek dak l-ewwel fattur il-likwidità, minn inti ninvestu xi ħaġa barra minn Malta biex ikollna element żejjed ta' likwidità. U mbagħad għandek id-diversification. Fuq diversification meta inti qed tinvesti Malta għandek żewġ elementi. L-ewwel net minn għandek exposure għall-ekonomija waħda. Li hija l-ekonomija Maltija. Mela, idealment inti ikollok ftit exposure li hija ftit inqas correlated mal-ekonomija Maltija. Da, ovvjament, l-ekonomija Maltija għandha cycles tagħha. Kon hemm perjodi fejn ma tkun sejra daqshekk tajb, allura inti trid li jkollok isu ftit insurance ġol portfolio.
Cushion, bażikament.
Cushion. Imma bad għandek ħaġa oħra, għandek mhux just diversifikazzjoni ġeografika biss imma anke fejtlu setturi. Ġifieri l-ekonomija Maltija is-setturi li huma available għall-investituri ma prattikament is-setturi li fuqhom hija mibnija l-ekonomija, ġifieri għandek il-financial services, tourism, gaming, construction, property development, etc. Allora hemmhekk x'tista' tagħmel, inti tista' jew ovvjament tara li kollok firxa ta' setturi lokalment. Tista' wkoll tinvesti f'kumpaniji Malti illi jiġġeneraw income tagħhom, revenues tagħhom minn barra minn Malta, ġifri għandna minn daw il-kumpaniji huma għandna kumpaniji tajbin li għamlu dat tip ta' business. Imma mbagħad ovvjament ikun hemm ċertu setturi li exposure għalihom ma tistax jiġġibha bli tinvesti f'Malta. Allura inti tara li ikollok ftit minn daw is-setturi wkoll.
Ikollok mix. Bażikament dak l-importanti.
Issa jekk tippermettili hawnhekk għax għandek nitkellmu x'nagħmlu fuq il-fond li għandu mandat biex investi Malta. Per eżempju aħna għandna fondi oħra pal-APS Diversified Bond Fund, which is a global bond fund, li notwithstanding li għandu mandat li investi fis-suq globali tal-bonds. Ekkun hemm il-fattur liħor ta' kwalità li semmejna aktar kwieni. Ġifieri Malta hawn investimenti ta' kwalità illi wkoll insibulhom post ġo mandates li għandna li investu internazzjonalment. Ġifieri jekk naraw li hemm investiment hawn Malta illi huwa ta' kwalità, kumpanija tajba toħroġ bond bi kwalità tajba bimax illi huwa adegwat għal ġifieri da fuq kollha fisib ruħu portfolio oħrajn.
Ara, forsi konna daqsxejn tekniċi s'issa, però ejja nkunu daqsxejn iktar tangibbli issa u nitkellmu dwar kumpaniji lokali, startups u l-bqija. Jien nifhem li l-lan aħħari huwa li jiżdied il-kapital fis-suq lokali. Imma x'jista' jsir minn kumpaniji Maltin biex isiru aktar attraenti għall-investituri?
Mela, ara, għaw kumpaniji għaw Malta li fl-opinjoni tiegħi sawa illi jafu x'għandhom jagħmlu u qed jagħmlu biċċa xogħol tajba biex jattiraw investituri. Però mbagħad niltaqgħu ma' stanzi fejn ikun hemm ċertu nuqqasijiet, pereżempju governance.
Kwistjoni ta' governanza.
Kwistjoni ta' governanza, per eżempju, biex nagħtu eżempju konkreta fuq xi qegħdin nitkellmu, jekk inti kumpanija qed tiġi għand fis-suq, qed titlob li tiddejjem mis-suq, titlob ammont kbir biex tiddejjem mis-suq, inti tittati daqsxejn konfidenza li meta l-investitur professjonali għall-inqas, ħalli jagħmilha kulħadd mhux investitur professjonali biss, imma fil-każ tagħna nitkellmu x'nagħmlu aħna. Jekk inħares lejn l-accounts tal-kumpanija u qed nara ċertu affarijiet, ċertu movimenti, pereżempju revaluations ta' proprjetà li jkunu ammonti kbar, jien nixtieq nara li mbagħad l-għażla ta' awditur ta' min qed jawditja il-financials ta' dik il-kumpanija, dak l-awditur jien għandi fiduċja fih. Fis-sens, mhux qed ngħid li hawn awdituri li mhumiex ta' fiduċja, imma inħossni aktar komdu meta nara isem ta' awditur illi jinqas għandi għalfejn mur infittex minnu dal-awditur.
Allora x'inhu l-parir tiegħek li tagħti lil dawn il-kumpaniji?
Jien naħseb dal-kumpaniji iridu l-ewwel nett tiżdied it-trasparenza mal-investituri. Il-kumpaniji m'għandhomx jiddejqu meta investituri bħalna isaqsu fuq il-business models, isaqsu fuq il-pjanijiet, isaqsu għalfejn il-kapital tal-kumpanija stess qed jiġu allokat b'ċertu mod u mhux ieħor. Inħoss li meta niltaqgħu ma' dal-kumpaniji aħna inħoss li nsaqsu mistoqsijiet u jkun hemm element ta' ma jkunux fully transparent jew jibżgħu jkunu fully transparent. Ġifieri dawn huma ftit mill-affarijiet ġifieri hawnhekk.
Mhux neċessarjament għax ikunu qed jagħmlu xi ħaġa ħażina, le jista' jkun li hija kwistjoni ta' kultura min-naħa tagħhom illi talmu hekk, ħafna drabi jkunu family businesses, talmu jagħmlu hekk u forsi mhux qegħdin jaraw il-validità għalfejn għandhom jagħmlu l-pass biex ibidlu l-affarijiet.
Jista' jkun, yes. At the end of the day, it's about investor relations. Ġifieri jekk inti trid li l-investituri jkunu partners miegħek iselfuk il-flus jew jinvestu actually jkunu shareholders fil-kumpanija tiegħek, titturihom illi inti titturihom x'nu l-business plan tiegħek, tkun open, tkun lest tirrispondi l-mistoqsijiet u tara illi jirnexxielek illi dak li qed twiegħed actually twettqu.
Dan jotta l-startups ukoll?
Yes. Yes, ovvjament l-element meta inti qed tinvesti ġo startup hemm element ta' riskju addizzjonali, ġifieri.
U hija waħda mir-raġunijiet għalfejn ħafna banek joqogħdu attenti mill-years u lejn l-startups jew għall-inqas il-kumment li tisma' mingħand l-startups ikun kemm hu diffiċli biex takkwista finanzjament.
Yes, hemm element ta' riskju addizzjonali, imma hemmhekk ovvjament l-ewwel l-investitur meta jinvesti ġo tip ta' business irid ikun jafal xi ġdieħel ukoll.
X'vantaġġi għandhom l-investituri Maltin meta jinvestu f'discretionary portfolio management jew retail funds?
Ara, kieku jien ammur pass qabel, x'inhu l-iżvantaġġ li ma tinvestix in the first, meta inti m'intix qed tinvesti titlef opportunità tkabbar il-kapital u qed tieħu riskju bl-inflazzjoni, ġifieri inti flus reqdin mhux tiġġeneraw lek xejn. Il-vantaġġi huwa li inti jkollok tim ta' nies professjonisti qed jieħdu lek ħsieb flusek, qed tifranka l-ħin qed jagħmlu x-xogħol huma għandhom aċċess għal-riżorsi illi investitur individwali m'għandux għalfejn għax dawn ir-riżorsi jiswew ħafna flus. Imma mbagħad pereżempju jekk qed tinvesti ġo discretionary portfolio għandek il-flessibilità li inti jkollok portfolio tailor-made għal-risk profile tiegħek għall-lanijiet finanzjarji tiegħek. Mentri mbagħad jekk qed tinvesti ġo fund għandek kif tkellimna aktar kmieni, ġifieri l-investiment ġo fund jibda minn ammont żgħir. B'ammont żgħir ta' flus tista' you achieve immediately a lot of diversification because the fund, because of the regulation, it's highly diversified, għandek likwidità, il-funds tagħna jiġu prezzati daily or weekly, ġifieri inti f'temp ta' ġimgħa qed ngħidu worst case scenario tista' toħroġ flusek minn ġol fund, u il-funds tagħna kif semmejtek ta' kmieni huma uses funds illi jipprovdu the highest level of protection for the retail investor.
David Lanzon minn ReAPS Asset Management, grazzi ħafna, t-tieni parti tal-podcast wara dawn. The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa miġġub lilkom minn ReAPS Asset Management, sussidjarja ta' APS Bank, the Energy and Water Agency, l-Aġenzija l-Enerġija u l-Ilma, kif ukoll blajnuna ta' Finance Malta. Fit-tieni parti ta' dan il-podcast se nitkellmu dwar investimenti etiċi, ethical funds. Biex nagħmlu dan Michael Debono li beda l-karriera tiegħu fl-2008 ma' Cube Services, Michael ingħaqad ma' Oceanwood Capital fl-2010 u mbagħad mar jaħdem Londra fl-2014 ma' Oceanwood ukoll. Huwa Chartered Financial Analyst illum ma' ReAPS Asset Management. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Michael, what can you tell me about APS ethical funds? What makes them stand out in the Maltese market?
So, at APS we have 3 ethical funds. And each fund has a different asset allocation and a different risk profile, so a different mandate. These funds are called the Adventurous Fund, that's the most risky, and that has an asset allocation which is predominantly towards equities. So it has 80% equities, 20% bonds. Then we have the Cautious Fund, that used to be called the APS Regular Income Ethical Fund before. This Cautious Fund is the least risky fund that we have, and it has 80%, or it's composed of 80% bonds and 20% equities. And more recently, it's just 6 months old, we have the Balanced Fund, which is 50% equities and 50% bonds. And in terms of the risk profile, that's somewhere in the middle between the adventurous fund and the cautious fund. These funds are all UCITS funds. So
That is?
UCITS stands for undertaking in collective investments for transferable securities. But basically what that means is that they are regulated by the UCITS directive, and that provides investors with more investor protection, liquidity, diversification, and also disclosure. And all of our funds, actually, not just the ethical funds, all of the 5 funds that we have are all under the UCITS umbrella. And this provides investors with a little bit more comfort, and also the ability to passport these funds also within the European Union. All the 3 funds invest globally. So these are not local funds, they invest across Europe and across the world. So we will have investments in the US, investments in China, and we do currently have a tilt towards Europe, but you will find both bonds and equities from across the world. And I think, you asked, how do we differentiate ourselves when it comes to ethical investing? There are various ways in which we do so, but one of the best ways, or one of the biggest differentiator that we have, is our track record. So the Ethical Cautious Fund has been around, or was launched in 2012. That was one of the first ethical funds in Malta, if not the first ethical fund on the island.
13 years ago.
13 years ago. And also before, ESG was very popular, before ethical investing was the norm. This was something which was aligned with the group's ethos and the group's values. And this has grown very steadily. Now this fund has over 35 million in terms of AUM. To put that into context, our total AUM at ReAPS that we manage is over 350 million at the moment, or around 350 million. So this is one of our oldest funds, but the oldest ethical fund in Malta. So we have a track record in managing ethical investments, and also we differentiate ourselves on performance. So yes.
Can you define ethical investments? I mean, what's ethical about them? What does ethical mean in practice when constructing and managing these portfolios?
Yes. So the word ethical can mean different things to different people. And this is actually one of the biggest challenges when managing ESG funds, or when managing ethical investments. For us at ReAPS, what we do is we publish what we call an ethical policy, and that outlines our ethical principles and the principles by which the fund will be managed. So let me go into a bit more detail here. The way that we manage our ethical funds, so the adventurous fund, the balanced fund, and the cautious fund, they'll all manage in the same way when it comes to applying our ethical principles. What we do is we first carry out a negative filtering criteria. What that means is we completely don't invest in certain industries, such as tobacco, military equipment, alcohol companies, anything that is deemed to be against our ethical policy or unethical in our view.
Harmful to society.
As a whole. And that is public. And so people know that when they are investors know when they're investing in our ethical suite of funds, then they know that they are investing according to these principles. And this ethical policy actually goes into more detail. We separate both the corporates and the sovereigns. So we also don't invest in certain countries, so the government debt of certain countries.
So you differentiate also between governments, basically?
Yes, we differentiate between governments, which is something that is quite unique. Again, a differentiating factor compared to competition, not only locally, but also European competition. Because very often, ethical funds stop at the corporate level. We go beyond that and even analyze sovereigns. And
from your experience, does an ethical investor exist?
So I think investors can invest ethically. So what that is doing is putting their money where their values lie, really. And I think what's important for investors to realize is that the way that you invest and the way that you spend your money and the way that you has direct and indirect consequences on actions of different businesses. So let me give you an example. If a business is issuing a bond, and that bond is coming out of a business that is involved in, I don't know, gambling, for example, which is one of our exclusion criteria, which we deem negative to society as a whole, we would not be buying that, and the ethical group or ESG group in general of investors will not be buying that bond, and that will make that bond more expensive. So that creates a disincentive.
Automatically.
An automatic disincentive, like a tax on these companies, and it makes them shift towards more social, or shifts capital towards more socially acceptable investment
So
opportunities.
basically, you're striking a balance between financial returns, ethical considerations. Actually, how do you do that?
So that's an interesting question, because a lot of people ask that question. So how do you strike a balance between ethical investing, but at the end of the day, making a good return
Nonetheless.
And the truth is that there isn't really. So we do not feel, and the data suggests that this is true, that there is not a trade-off to be had between investing ethically and making money. That trade-off doesn't exist in real life. But most of our investors, when they come and we present to them our ethical suite of funds, ask this question. They say, okay, I'd like not to invest in these sectors. I'd like to, create this disincentive that I've spoken about. But at the end of the day, I need to invest money and make a good return. And the truth is that over the long term, ethical funds will perform at least as well as, let's say, traditional investment funds. In the short term, you might see some deviation. So, for example, year to date, at the moment, military companies are doing very well because there's a big drive, a big fiscal spend towards military expenditure.
Because of the
Europe.
geopolitical tensions,
Because of the geopolitical tensions, because of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, because of Trump's pressure on NATO allies to increase spending. And so you'll see a deviation over there, which is short term. But over the longer term, ethical funds tend to invest much more in high-quality companies and larger companies. And therefore, they tend to outperform, at least the data suggests this, that they tend to outperform on the way down. So when markets are going down and when you're seeing default rates increasing, then ethical funds tend to outperform because they're invested in quality.
Michael, earlier I asked you a question about the existence or otherwise of an ethical investor. But I mean, can you perceive a change in attitude towards sustainable and ethical investing in Malta over the past few years?
Yes, so definitely. So I think there's definitely been an increase in awareness. Also, people are becoming more educated about ethical investing, about ESG investing as a whole. I think there's still a lot more to go when it comes to the local investor, but not only the local investor, even the international investor, in terms of being more active, in terms of thinking of investing in a company not as an investment, but as the owner of a company. At the end of the day, when you are buying shares in a company, you are the owner. The management works for you, not the other way around. And therefore, this attitude needs to prevail more in Europe and especially in Malta. People should use their votes when they go to AGMs. They should ensure that what management is doing is actually in the interests of shareholders and according to the values of shareholders, or that shareholders hold close to their heart.
You're saying that participation is key.
Participation is key. Participation is key, and we have a very passive investor base generally because they
Why
think...
is that?
I think it's because they feel as though their small investment cannot make a big difference. But the truth is that even with a small investment, you can actually rally a lot of other investors around you to create significant change. There are many activist funds in Europe that own minority shares in companies but drive real change. Drive real change more towards let's say, an ethical stance, or change which is more to create shareholder value, for example. There are different types of change that investors can drive. For example, more transparency. Companies should be very transparent in their actions. And I think that's very important. So I think investor activism is important and investor education is important. And that's something that needs to happen more. It's improved a lot over the past 5 years I've been in Malta, but we need to continue to educate the public to ensure that they know that when they are investing, they are creating incentives and disincentives with that investment decision. And that's also important for investment managers like ourselves to understand, and also for investment advisors out there.
What are some of the main challenges in running ethical funds?
There are various challenges in running ethical funds. I would say obviously there are the traditional challenges such as volatility, how to manage portfolios in an increasingly volatile world, and also in a world that is increasingly driven not by the fundamentals but by, for example, tweets and what people say and things like that, which are moving markets in an extraordinary way. Something that I've never seen in more than 15 years. So
social media has a lot to answer,
So
and politicians in particular.
And
in
politicians
certain
too.
countries, they have a lot to answer for.
They do, and they also need to understand that their actions and also their comments can move markets and can, even in some cases, manipulate markets, which I think shouldn't happen, because at the end of the day, you're creating a lot
And
of
it's highly
volatility.
unethical.
And highly unethical in itself, and illegal as well, at least in Europe. So this is certainly something that I feel is a big challenge. But also, when speaking about specifically ethical investing, one of the biggest challenges is consistency of data. So to give you a bit of an example, one company could be classified as ethical by one, let's say, consultancy, one international consultancy, and then a different international consultancy might have a different methodology and say that this is actually unethical, or it does not pass the threshold or the scoring threshold in order to be considered ethical. And therefore you see differences between, and to be fair, this is improving a lot and has improved with different legislation, etc., over time, that different ethical funds are converging more together. But there is still a lot of dispersion at the moment, which means that you might have one company in one ethical fund, but not in another ethical fund. This is why we feel it is very important for us to be as transparent as possible with our ethical policies, so that when you're buying the ethical funds, you know exactly what you're buying and what our values are, and if those align at the end of the day with your values. But it is not a trade-off between performance and ethical investment. You can do both. And very often, at least it depends on sort of the history that you take, very often ethical funds outperform traditional funds.
Michael Debono, that was a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Grazie wkoll il-David Lanzone li kien magħna waqt dan il-podcast minn dan it-tieni staġun ta' The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast. Grazie ħafna tal-li segwejtuna, inkunu magħkom fil-ġimgħat li ġejjin. The Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa miġjub lilkom minn ReAPS Asset Management, sussidjarja ta' APS Bank, the Energy and Water Agency, l-Aġenzija l-Enerġija u l-Ilma, kif ukoll bl-għajnuna ta' Finance Malta. Malta-EU Business Gateway, the MBB podcast, huwa produzzjoni ta' The Malta Business Bureau, kontenut Mario Xpiereb, assistenza teknika Ralf Grima. The Malta Business Bureau hija l-fera ta' konsulenza ta' The Malta Chamber of Commerce u l-Malta Hotels and Restaurants Association.